Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 11th meeting of the City of Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Sherry Bilderback, here. Michael Daming.
Here.
Mark Pavazza.
Here.
Jennifer Hansen.
Here.
Michael Hart.
Here.
Rebecca Jacobs.
Here.
Clint Lewis. Jeff Moore.
Here.
Paul Moran.
Paul, here, yeah, sorry.
Hart Nelson.
Here.
John Nurenberger. John Ritter.
Here.
Lisa Schuring.
Here.
Tom Shipley.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Bilderback. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of the March 14th meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at those minutes? Are there any changes to said minutes? Or any objection to passing them by acclamation? Seeing none, they're passed by acclamation. Next item on the agenda is a bittersweet one. It's a recognition of service. We have two members of our commission, Clint Lewis, who has resigned effective before this meeting. Actually, he resigned about a month ago. He moved out of Brentwood. And Jennifer Hansen, who is here this evening, is submitted her resignation effective at the end of this meeting. Both of these members have been great stewards of our community. I have a great deal of respect for both of them. Jen, in particular, I think you have a great mind, and I think the commission will be for the worse for having lost you. So we're very sad to see you go, but we did get a little bit of a plaque, a little commemoration, and I'll read it. The City of Brentwood, City of Warmth, presented to Jennifer Hansen in recognition and appreciation for 5 years of service to the City of Brentwood on the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you.
Time flies when you're having fun.
So thank you very much. We haven't agreed all the time, but I've always respected you, and I think you're a reasonable and very smart person, and we will be for the worst for having lost you.
Likewise, it's been a real pleasure serving. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, we have no new business this evening. We have two very old pieces of business to take up tonight, both of which we've taken up and this commission has considered over the course of multiple meetings. The first item is a short-term rental text amendment to our ordinances, which we've taken up. I think this is the fifth meeting that we've considered this issue. This has been kind of a snake bit type issue. The commission will recall at the third meeting that we took this up, I should say, yes, at the third meeting, my understanding and my recollection is that we had essentially a full commission here, and at that time, the commission, in particular after hearing some of the difficulties with enforcement, there was a strong consensus in favor of a general prohibition of short-term rentals in our community. At the fourth meeting that we considered this issue, which was the second meeting. At the third meeting that we took this issue up, we had 8 people from the commission that were present. And that was unfortunate, but it was spring break. And at that time and at that meeting, there was a majority of the commission that was present that was not in favor of prohibition and rather was in favor of allowing short-term rentals with some regulation. So at the last meeting, at the end of March, we took this short-term rental issue up. And in light of the decision at the third meeting, this commission considered and adopted what I would deem to be some reasonable regulations on short-term rental. Now, I will say that I personally am opposed to short-term rental. I do not think that this is the time to change the status quo and to allow short-term rentals in our particular community. I know there's some people here that agree with me. I know there's some people here that don't agree with me. But we do have regulations to the extent this commission would like to allow these short-term rentals with regulations. We do have some regulations that were the subject of significant discussion and deliberation at the last meeting, and we certainly can take those up. Before we do that, we have a comprehensive plan issue, which is something that we haven't taken up in nearly 20 years. So that's going to take up some time tonight. So what I'd like to do is, we have more than 8 people here tonight, rather than the third meeting. So I'd like to just take a straw poll as to whether or not you as a commissioner are in favor of a prohibition at this time of short-term rentals entirely. And then we'll just see how that goes. So just a straw poll, you're not bound to it, but who would be inclined to favor a prohibition on short-term rentals in the city of Brentwood at this time? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And who would be inclined to either regulate or at least have further discussion on it? Okay, well, I think that's close enough that I think we should have further consideration. So have the members of the commission had an opportunity to review the regulations that the last subcommittee took under consideration for short-term rentals in our community? And hopefully you have. And these regulations should all be incorporated within this ordinance that you should all have in front of you. And Ms. Kirkemeyer, would you mind just, and like I said, the whole subcommittee at the last meeting took these regulations up, and it was, the idea of prohibition was off the table. This was in the event that there is a majority of the commission that would like to have short-term rentals, what regulations should we have? And the commissioners, under those parameters, believed that these were regulations that should be incorporated within our community. So, Ms. Kirkemeyer, would you mind just reviewing the regulations that I believe a unanimous commission, under those parameters, considered to be appropriate?
Sure, and I'll try to make this brief because I know there's a lot of people here this evening. But what is in front of you tonight, or what you received in your packets already last week, was again the direction from the commission for us to go ahead and prepare text amendments to our current ordinance that would allow short-term rentals with regulations. I will state again that right now there is a prohibition of short-term rentals in Brentwood. So in order to be able to make these changes, the first thing that these text amendments do is it visits each zoning district where residential uses are allowed, which would be our single-family residential districts, our multifamily, our attached residential, and also the urban development district. That would be like the district that accommodates Hanley Station or the Villas of Brentwood. Again, any districts that allow residential uses. The same language was put in each one of those zoning districts, which basically allows as a permitted use short-term rental of a single-family dwelling that is the owner's primary residence. And it says for no more than 180 days in any license year, subject to the numerical limitation on business license that may be issued for this activity. So that again was an insertion that went into all of those zoning districts individually. The second thing that we took a look at then was there was also some older terms, if you would, or definitions that were used in the home occupation section of the current code. So if we're going to allow short-term rentals, then we didn't want any of this old language that might be kind of seen as a short-term rental, such as a tourist home. I'm not really sure what a tourist home is. So there were just a couple of refinements or amendments made there, taking out some language that was really vague. So again, someone couldn't come back and say that short-term rentals is permitted as or prohibited as a home occupation. And then, again, because those that wanted to support this or thinking about supporting it really felt like regulations needed to be put in place, there was general agreement that a business license would be issued for short-term rentals. So what we did was create an existing code that for short-term rentals, a business license would be required, and then under that section is where you really get into the regulations that the commissioners were thinking about imposing. So we had, for instance, a limit or a cap of how many short-term rentals would be allowed in Brentwood, which the number that those that were present last time came up with was 20. I'm just kind of going, these are not in any particular order, then I'm just kind of reading through the code. The next one, though, pertained again that only a person could apply for a short-term rental for their primary residence. So that means that person would have to verify to planning and development staff that it is their primary residence for more than 180 days out of the calendar year. And so this then again would prohibit if someone just came in, bought up properties in Brentwood, used them as rental properties and turned them all into short-term rental. That would not be able to work under the way this regulation has been stated. Other things were, and these again were very specific things that the commissioners wanted to see in here, was that an owner of the property who is listed on the deed shall provide the city with contact information so that the owner may be reached at any time concerning the property in any short-term rental. That one probably speaks for itself, I would say. Also, we talked a little bit about parking issues and should there be additional requirements with parking, prohibit off-street parking, all kinds of things. But at the end, what the commissioners had wanted to see was something written in terms of short-term rental guests shall not be allowed to park more than 2 vehicles within the city. And then the other thing then would be to explain how this would all work. Again, there would be a cap of 20. So anybody who could come in and show that this is their primary residence, they would start with the Planning and Development Department. They would apply for a business license. Our inspectors would go out and inspect the premises for all the building code requirements. And then also, as part of that inspection, given the size of the house, the number of bedrooms, things of that nature, there is always assigned a maximum occupancy of persons that could be sleeping there at that quarters. So there would also be a maximum occupancy established for the short-term rental. And then what would happen is if it passes inspection, it meets all the other codes, then we would issue a short-term certificate of occupancy as kind of a permit that would be good for a year. And then every year they would have to come back, apply for the annual business license, which would also trigger an annual inspection. That was kind of some of the highlights. But if you have any other questions, I can certainly address them at this time.
Good. Well, let me first make sure, is that consistent with those commission members that were at the subcommittee meeting? Is that consistent with the regulations that were adopted, again, within those parameters?
Yes.
Okay.
Consensus.
Good. Questions, thoughts from commissioners? Okay. Ms. Bilderback.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was unfortunately not feeling well and couldn't make the subcommittee meeting. I did send in comments, which I understand from the chairman. Our planning and zoning director kindly provided to the committee members that were present at the time. I did notice that one thing, unless I'm missing it, and I didn't catch it in your summary, Lisa, was that one of the provisions that had been in there was that the homeowner had to be present when it was rented. That was in the last draft, and by my recollection and what my reading, that's been taken out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I have a concern about that. That was something I felt really strongly about. I have a general opposition to this whole concept, as we know, for a host of reasons, and I'll get into that at the end. But that being said, if we end up with an ordinance, I think it needs to be a good one and as protective to the community as possible. And under that light is why I would share these comments. I think that these are residential neighborhoods. We're dealing with the character of a neighborhood situation, and the safety and the peaceful use of their own property of the neighbors and the residents that are around these locations. And we did hear from a lot of residents who were opposed at one of our subcommittee meetings, which wasn't obviously televised, but. So I think that that's really important because no one other than the resident who owns the home being present is going to have the same level of responsibility to make sure that that's taken care of. An off-site property manager would not. Even hotels have people that are on-site to take care of things. So and of course they're in commercial areas, they're not in residential areas, and we're talking about things like single-family homes in residential areas with children. And we had some residents who had spoken about some concerns they had with, their I guess they were young children or school-age children, I can't remember which, relative to some of the behaviors and the activities that were going on at some of these places, which was the whole reason why this came to the Planning Commission to begin with, was because we were looking to simply clarify a prohibition. I mean, that was why it was sent to us from the Board of Aldermen. Even though, to me, the current ordinance is clear, they wanted to have different, more modern language to do that. So the other thing that I had recommended that I don't think got into here, and it's not an occupancy permit, and this is actually something that has been done in Europe and that I have done repeatedly on my travels to Europe, which is a registration in advance of folks who would be staying at any type of this establishment, in this case, a short-term rental. They even do that for small motels and some hotels in Europe, where you fill out all your information, in advance, and it's run by some government entities who get a copy of it, that type of a thing. So, for example, when I was staying in Salzburg, Austria, at this small bed and breakfast type hotel, it's not a hotel, but a bed and breakfast essentially. And staying there, we had a registration card. We had a registration card with the bed and breakfast. And in fact, in the city of Salzburg, Austria, in that occasion, you were only allowed to go into certain districts. If you didn't have a card that allowed you to go in that residential district from the bed and breakfast, you were not allowed to go into that district. So my point being that if we're going to talk about things that hasn't historically been around, we might look at some of the more advanced regulations that they have in some European cities on this. So my suggestion was that we have a simple, easy, non-onerous form on the Brentwood website for any transient guest that would come to the city to stay in an Airbnb or a short-term rental. That's just a brand name. That would stay in a short-term rental where they would have to put like their name, their address, contact information, and also if they're a registered sex offender, and if they are, in which state, in which community, and that information as well. So I thought, if we're bringing folks that are short-term renters, they're not background checks, and even with some of these online apps, someone may lose their privileges later, but that's after the horses are already out of the barn. So the way to prevent or to help with that problem is to get the information in advance. And in a residential area with no surveillance, no security cameras, no staff on site, I think it's really important that our residents, or at least our police, have that information available to them. Then the other thing I was going to recommend was that we have a dedicated city complaint hotline just for this issue. So for all the residents that we heard about who have concerns with the current situation in their neighborhood, that we have that, so they would have somebody to go to address immediately their concerns with it. And if the owner was in the residence, it would be much easier to resolve as well, of course. And then I also wanted to ask, and it may be in here and I'm just now slipping my mind, but how do they lose their license? What are the violations upon which, and how do the business license folks for these however many short-term rentals in the city of Brentwood lose their license?
So that was asked at the last meeting, and I said I wanted to research that just to make sure, but this is how it would work. So if any business would not be able to meet any of the conditions or requirements of the code, so in other words, all the things that I just mentioned, if they would not be able to comply with that or would not comply with it, that would be
a nuisance.
Yeah, that would be a reason to revoke the business license. And so the process for that would be is that upon notification of their business license being revoked, they would have an appeal in front of the Ways and Means Committee, which is a committee of the Board of Aldermen. The other way it can be done is if there was a nuisance there is a provision to revoke a permit. If something is causing a nuisance, which has a different process, it would be again upon notice of the Planning and Development Director, and that would be heard by the city clerk. But I probably would not go that route. I would probably use the section in the business license, because it's easier to be able to document if they just didn't comply with the requirement versus the whole nuisance thing. And actually, if we would follow the one with the nuisance, they get an opportunity to fix that, or what's the word I'm looking for? And I
Remedy.
Yeah, a certain time to remedy it, like 20 days, so. But
So-
that's how it would work.
So is there a provision in there for, like, let's say they're having transient guests that are staying in their home and they're out at night really loud, or they block their driveway, or they're parking in somebody else's driveway, or they're having trash, or, general types of nuisances, or shady activity, like people coming in and out that aren't even the transient guests, that kind of a situation, cars coming up for quick, I'm getting at drug sales and things like that as well. That you see this sort of thing on television with short-term rentals, watching some of the police shows and
Where
whatnot.
would that be, Ms. Bilderback?
What would,
What's the source, please? Fox News or?
no ma'am, watching police shows online with what police officers deal with on a daily basis live, like about 8 hours a week.
Like cops?
No,
Come on,
but this
one
is
at a
really irrelevant to my point, because this is, so my question, Ms. Corkemeyer, my question is, for all of those types of things that could happen, and also understanding that we've had residents who were afraid living next to these with their children, and they stated that at a public meeting of Brentwood, if there were things that they were concerned that were making them afraid to have their children come home after school by themselves from these short-term rentals, for whatever the reason was that was happening at the time, what is their recourse? Like, if you have a resident that you're talking about with the nuisances, like I own a single-family home, the neighbor next to me owns their house, right? So they let their weeds grow up, or it's a nuisance, or they're doing this, that, or the other, and there's that process. But what is the remedy for the person who's living next to it if there then is that type of a nuisance? Does that go under the business license process that you talked about, or do we have to create something new that would actually fit this rather than shoehorn it into something else?
No, you just call the police, right? Isn't that the remedy? You call it, it's an ordinance violation. Police
Same
have
way
the
you would
authority
handle
to,
the
police have the
neighbor that
authority
lived
to.
there or owned.
Isn't that right, Ms. Carr?
Yeah, so there's a provision in the regulations in the proposed ordinance in front of you, and it says that each owner of the property used for short-term rental purposes shall ensure that the short-term rental does not cause a nuisance or otherwise disturb the peace of surrounding neighbors. So if the city did receive reports of peace disturbances or otherwise, nuisance conditions such as the parking, then they could either, under this provision, it would be a violation of their business license. They could either move to revoke the business license, or they could also proceed to discipline the business license under the nuisance provision. So they could do either or, because
Okay.
that is included in the ordinance under 43125, subparagraph E.
Thank you. I wanted to have a much better understanding of that. So it sounds like that would need to be recrafted, that is already at least covered. So my request would be that we add back in that the homeowner needs to be present during the time of the rentals, that we have an online sign-up form for the transient guests, which would be a real simple form that could be done even 24 hours in advance of their stay online, that we have a dedicated complaint hotline. And short of that, I still don't think it's enough to address the problems, and I would point out again that it's premature to me to do any of this because the state legislature probably isn't going to pass anything on this year. They may or may not pass anything next year. We would just have to go and revise it because it may or may not match with whatever goes through the sausage making that is the Missouri State legislative process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other commissioners? Ms. Hanson?
I'm sorry I have to address the commission again on this. I thought we had said everything that needed to be said. I think first, I would like the record to reflect that there's a difference between having an opinion based on facts and trying to stoke fears. Our city is a city of renters and owners. I've been a renter here. I've been an owner here. I have 3 single-family properties with long-term rentals, and I own an office here. I have had owners of adjacent properties who have been great. I've had some who have been subpar. I don't think it's a good idea to conflate ownership or long-term renters with guests who rent a house out for a weekend. Typically families coming in, somebody here for business. I think the fear-mongering description of drug dealers searching online for a VRBO or an Airbnb just so they can stay up late, taunt neighbor kids, and sell drugs to people is really, it's inappropriate and it's inaccurate. I would also push back against the notion that there is a longstanding prohibition of short-term rentals in Brentwood. That's not true. If it were, we wouldn't have this conversation. No, there's been no express permit allowing short-term rentals. Why else would a short-term rental prohibition be pushed through committee and have a reading in front of the aldermen? It's important as a recommending body for us to undertake a diligent course of consideration, input from the community, and also from our attorney, who's, I think, been quite valuable in helping us here. The subcommittee meeting, the last subcommittee meeting where we put together the ordinance, was nothing short of reasonable, thoughtful, measured, and considered. We have a 3,000, I think, unit or house population in Brentwood. We are talking about 20 permits for a one-year period with regulations and restrictions on the number of days they can have renters, whether they own the property or an investor owns it, and other regulations that each and every commissioner who showed up for the subcommittee sat and considered and said, these are reasonable regulations. So I think regardless of whether this fails or passes and we recommend it or we don't recommend it, I want to be clear about the process here. This isn't, if we do this, we're going to start, fire and brimstone in the neighborhood. People are going to burn down houses, shoot each other, whatever. No, this is just a situation where long-term rentals are becoming popular nationally, internationally, and we have the opportunity to allow citizens of our neighborhood who are homeowners to take in guests to either help pay for their mortgage, take over payments while they're out visiting a family member. So this is a relatively innocuous situation. I just needed to put that on the record. So that's all I have to add, and I appreciate everyone's input. I appreciate the consideration, and I think whether this lives or dies, I think it'll probably be revisited soon. This is an eventuality, and it's not something we can stick our heads in the sand in. I think having the opportunity to do sort of a beta test with 20 permits over a population is a really good way to understand how this works. So, thank you.
Okay, I think those are two very good summaries of the competing positions here, and we've had a great deal of discussion on this issue. Mr. Shipley, do you have something new?
I do have something new. I do agree with Ms. Hanson across the board, and will sorely miss the way that she summarizes these complicated discussions. As this is her last meeting. The only clarification I did have, we did have discussion in the subcommittee about the penalty. So there's a business license required, registration is required for those short-term rentals that are discovered to be operating without the business license. We talked about some pretty severe penalties and repercussions, if we could just kind of recap that for you.
Sure. So if they were found to be in violation of the business license regulations or operating without a business license, then a summons would likely be issued. It's possible that we would give them a courtesy notice ahead of time and give them the opportunity to get a business license. But a summons could be issued, and then that would go to the city's municipal court. And for those types of violations, the maximum penalty is up to $1,000 fine for each instance, or up to 90 days in jail, or both fine and imprisonment.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Is there any member of the audience who would like to address the commission on this issue? Seeing none, the chair will entertain a Yes, ma'am. Please step forward and state your name, your address, and what you'd like to say.
Karen Smith, I live at the Harrison Motel. I apologize, I was not able to make the last meeting. I really wanted to make the last meeting, but I had an emergency that came up at work, and I apologize, and I appreciate the thoughtful discussion that happened. A couple of comments that I would make. I know that maybe you were fortunate enough not to have drug trafficking happening in a rental property next to yours, but those problems actually do exist. I don't know if they would be
but it was
through
with an
Airbnb.
owner of a property.
Yeah, but I can share with you a website. Another neighbor shared with me some articles about a lot of sex trafficking that happens to these Airbnbs. So I don't think that I would characterize some of the things that were said as trying to create fear that's not there. I do think for some of us that this is a reality, and I'm sorry that you haven't had that experience to live next door to some of that kind of stuff. I would really support having the property owner having to be there on site during the rental term. They don't have to be there 24/7 while they're there, but I feel like they should at least be there in the evening. If we are willing to subject the neighbors to this kind of establishment in our community, I feel like that the owner should have to also be present on the facility while the renter is in the house. Granted, if they work during the day or they want to go out to dinner and the renter's in the house, that's okay, but they should be there for the majority of the time, at least at night. And then I would like to know, I do feel strongly about having to have a number to call in case there is a violation. I'm a little unclear about that. I know we would notify, I guess, Lisa and the Planning and Zoning Department, but if this happens at midnight, in a hotel or a motel or bed and breakfast, you've got a number that you call and issues are addressed. And I think that as neighbors, we would definitely need to have some sort of expectation about what a turnaround. So if there is a specific instance going on, that we have a confidence level that it would be addressed. There was also discussion at one of the meetings that I was at about parking having the renters park on the premises, and I guess I didn't see that was discussed, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to also consider that option as well. I also like the fact of putting some spatial distances between those. That was something that was on the list that you all apparently discussed last time, but I think it received a not in favor vote. But again, just to spread the joy out. I don't think that I think sometimes, and this is just a personal note, but I feel like sometimes people come into neighborhoods like mine. I don't feel that like my neighborhood's well represented in this city on many of the boards and commissions. But when people outside of my neighborhood come in and they want to do Airbnbs and they want to extend the land use map in and bring mixed use and commercial development further back into the residential areas, I just feel that is not treating. I don't think that's what Brentwood should be about. I don't classify Brentwood the city of warmth when you treat your residents like that. I think that's probably most of it. And I guess I would just leave with you, I think many of you do have kids, and I just would ask you to think twice about whether you would want your kids living next door to a house or a home that had that kind of activity going on. And I know many of you think that just the kind of bungalow, 2-bedroom homes are the ones that are only attractive for this. But I'm having discussions with people with some of our larger homes that are in the York Woods for some business opportunities. So I think that it could expand to some other opportunities so that you would all have the joy of seeing what this is like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman?
Would any other member of the audience like to address the commission? Yes, please step forward, ma'am, and introduce yourself and your address and state your point.
My name is Jacqueline Winkler, and I live off of Patton. And I guess my biggest question is, if these Airbnbs, if they're illegal now, what are we doing about this? I mean, why are we allowing this to happen right now? What are you doing about it right now?
Chairman, if you want me to
Ms.
answer,
Kirk-
I can.
yeah,
I
go
know
ahead,
we've
Ms.
done this
Kirkmeyer.
quite a few times.
Either way.
So very briefly, we know that, we suspect that there might be 5 short-term rentals that might be currently operating in Brentwood. We've continued to document those in ways we can document those. But when we came to going ahead and pursuing it, our current language is not really clear in our existing code. And so it's best to get your code fixed before you try to pursue these. And that was the advice that was given, good legal advice. So that's what happened a few months ago when the proposed text amendment, just clarifying the prohibition, was put on the table, which actually is now in the hands of the Board of Aldermen. And then this came as a result of knowing about the proposed text amendments to clarify the prohibition. Then the regulation started,
So
that's why-
Airbnbs right now aren't illegal?
That's correct, in Brentwood.
They are not illegal in Brentwood?
They are not legal.
They are not legal.
They are
Yes.
illegal.
Yes, they are illegal.
Okay, so they are legal?
They're prohibited.
They're illegal.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And I would disagree with that, say that they're just not expressly permitted at this point.
And that's exactly why we were told we needed to clarify our
Yeah.
code, because you can,
It calls
interpret it
it-
differently.
It calls it a
Otherwise, we'd be
tourist
enforcing it.
home
Hang on,
right
we
now.
gotta do one, we gotta do one by one, guys.
The language calls it a tourist home right now, and the proposed language on the prohibition was going to change it to like a transient from the word tourist. So it's, the way I look at it is older language versus modern day language. But that's where the subjectivity or argument comes in, where the city felt that they needed to have some or they didn't need to have a clarification, but they would be in a stronger position legally to take care of the issue if they had a clarification.
So right now, we're not doing anything about this, we're waiting for the regulations.
We're documenting.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead and step forward, ma'am, and state your name and your address and what you'd like to address.
My name is Edie, and I'm on Harrison. One of the things I was wondering, in the boundaries of Brentwood, can the 20 Airbnb people be in one area, or is it so many per area within
There's-
our boundaries?
There's no zoning restriction as presented in this ordinance, so they
Is that
could be
something we
anywhere
should
in the city
consider
of
so
Brentwood.
that 15 of them couldn't be in a 3-block area?
That was
Is that
considered,
reasonable? Is that considered reasonable?
I think so.
that was considered at the last meeting. That is not part of the ordinance. That's before the commission.
And so could we, is that something that we could do? I am troubled by some of the body language of some of the people who feel that this is exhausting to cross this bridge again.
I am too.
It is very serious, and we're homeowners. And so to see that kind of unprofessional body language is not acceptable.
Okay.
But
Thank you, ma'am.
that is something I would like to see considered if we have a boundary within Brentwood, that we would have so many B&Bs allowed within that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Is that something that we could consider?
If one of the commissioners would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance that we have in front of us, that would be something we'd have to take up, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Michelle Pergotti. I'm new to Brentwood. My family is. We're on Moritz. So will we know if there are bed and breakfasts in terms of the homes? Will there be signs and so forth?
No.
So
there
we
would not
won't
be.
know.
No.
So one thing I like about Brentwood is it does feel safe. My 13-year-old daughter is finally walking home from school, and she's there by herself for a while. So I can really appreciate people's concerns about safety. So just something to think about for new residents. Maybe there's a way to mark if these things are there, what they are, just so we know. I mean, I think that seems reasonable. I mean, I don't know.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm concerned too.
Yeah, Mr. Shipley?
That's actually a good point, question for, once the business license was given, are all the business licenses in Brentwood public information and they'd be on the website?
They are open records, so somebody could come in and take a look at the 20 business licenses, and there's only one business license issued per location or per applicant, so it would designate the address for which the business license applied. And then also when they advertise it on Airbnb or wherever, they have to give the business license number of the city under this ordinance.
Great, thank you.
I think we're ready to move on. So if there's no further discussion, Chair will entertain a motion. Ms. Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we approve the ordinance amending certain sections relating to the regulation of short-term rentals within the city as drafted in the last subcommittee meeting and presented to us today.
Second?
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the ordinance, which will allow short-term rentals with the regulations that the subcommittee had discussed. So a yes vote would be in favor of allowing that short-term rental with those regulations. A no vote would mean either you favor prohibition, no short-term rentals, or that you don't agree with these regulations. Understood? Any discussion, clarification? Roll call?
Sherry Bilderback, no. Mark Favazza,
No.
Jennifer Hansen,
Yes.
Michael Hart,
Yes.
Rebecca Jacobs,
No.
Jeff Moore,
No.
Paul Moran,
No.
Hart Nelson,
Yes.
John Ritter,
No.
Lisa Schuring,
No.
Tom Shipley,
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. There are 7 noes and 4 yes. Motion fails, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bilderback. So that motion is not approved and will be forwarded to the idea of allowing short-term rentals with regulations will be forwarded with a unfavorable recommendation. And I do want to say that I appreciate both sides of this debate. I thought there were good points made on both sides of the debate. So thank you to all commissioners for your attention and your due diligence on this issue. All right, we have one other issue, and it's a big one. It's one that we've taken up over a dozen meetings on, and it's our comprehensive plan. And it's warranting significant attention because we haven't had a new comprehensive plan since 2006. This process started back in 2014 when a consultant was engaged to review our 2006 comprehensive plan and make certain recommendations. And the consensus of this commission, who is in charge of forwarding, passing, and approving a comprehensive plan, was that we needed a new comprehensive plan. So the same consultant was then engaged to develop a new comprehensive plan. There was a comprehensive plan advisory committee that was formulated to work with the consultant and make recommendations to this commission. That comprehensive plan advisory committee was formed in August of 2016, and there's been over a dozen meetings with that commission, with the Planning and Zoning Commission, with Ms. Kirkemeyer. Who else did we have? We had community workshops, we had business workshops, we had Hanley Industrial Court Association meetings, and several stakeholder meetings as well. So we have thoroughly vetted this comprehensive plan, in my opinion, and the outcome and the output is this nice thick book, which hopefully you all have had an opportunity to review in advance of this meeting. We do have a representative of the consultant, Mr. Mohit, here tonight. And Mr. Mohit, one of the things, we've had a couple different public hearings on this case. The last one that we had was in December of 2017. At that public hearing, there were several good comments that were raised by the citizens. There were several good comments that were raised by committee members, commission members, and I believe that Mohit took those into account and has refined this comprehensive plan. But if you could just review for the commission what has happened since our public hearing in December of 2017 until now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is Mohit Maheshwari from Halsey Levine Associates. So we had the public hearing in December, and at the time, there was some concerns on a couple of items, especially related to land use issues on Brentwood Boulevard and also on Hanley Industrial Area. And there are some transportation issues on Hanley Industrial Area, what we recommended. So we incorporated those changes. So I just wanted to go over with you. I hope you all have a copy of the plan with you. So the land use changes along Brentwood Boulevard, the issue that we had last time was like we didn't have enough width along the Brentwood Boulevard to have any kind of a commercial or a mixed-use development possible. So we addressed that. We went back and forth, made some changes with the city staff, and then we changed the land use boundary to reflect, to have enough width in along the side of Brentwood Boulevard that would help allow establishment of commercial or a mixed-use development. We did, however, consider also look very specifically on residential area and then made sure that it won't negatively affect any of the existing residential property. At least that's from the land use perspective. And that's the recommendation. It's like a long-term vision. So there won't be any, like we are recommending acquisition or anything like that. It's just mainly that this land is more suitable for certain kind of development. So we made those changes along Brentwood Boulevard. And one of the change we made in our previous plan, we had in front of Brentwood Recreation Center, we proposed like a town center area, like to reconfigure all the buildings around it to contain the space. So that was taken away based on the comments that we received. So those things, I think that that particular recommendation was taken off. Then some of the land use adjustment near the Strassner and Brentwood Boulevard, we made some changes there. So those are the changes that reflected along the Brentwood Boulevard. Then we, on Manchester Road, we understand that there were certain studies that are going on in Brentwood related to flood mitigation. So there were few revisions from the trail alignment, and I know that Great Rivers Greenway is also working to extend their system of trails through Brentwood. And with this flood mitigation, so there were several overlapping projects that were happening in Brentwood for the last 1.5 years. So we took that into consideration. We showed those recommendations in our plan that will be in the Parks and Open Space map. So those recommendations from other studies are reflected in the comprehensive plan going forward, and we recommend those also. I think they are great recommendations. Then also there were certain properties along Manchester Road that we identified to be redeveloped. I think those were taken off based on the feedback we got. And then some of the land use adjustments that we made, especially east of Brentwood Boulevard on Manchester Road, we changed those land use to mixed use. That recommendation, those are the changes we made along Manchester. Then on Henley Industrial Area, we made changes related to transportation. Like in a previous plan, we recommended loop road concept, one-way loop road, and we realized that was not welcome in the association. For Henley Industrial Area, so we take a note of it last time, and we did make those changes. So we took the loop road out. The roads are currently two-way roads. However, we do recommend to make like a parallel parking there. That would be best for that area. There were no changes made for the land use in Henley Industrial Area. I think we are pretty cities in agreement with what we recommended for Henley Industrial Area. We did recommend a name change. Instead of Henley Industrial Area, it should be something like Henley Business Park, and I think most people agree to that also, to put that area on St. Louis map if you have more, like a better term to represent the kind of vision that you have for that area. Those are the changes. I think those are the main changes that we made in our comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mohit. Ms. Kirkemeyer, staff report?
Yes, those revisions that Mohit had talked about, those have taken place over the last several months between the drafts of the document that we've looked at. Specifically, since the December 13th public hearing, there were a few more that I guess I made note of that have been addressed and incorporated into the plan. We had somebody presented at the public hearing that was with the library, and they had expressed interest in wanting to keep the library in the town center and look for ways to expand the library facility. Their discussions with the school board, with talking about combining those types of facilities, had pretty well just taken kind of a back seat for now, so they were very much interested in still being in the town center location. That has been addressed on page 80 of the comp plan. There was a person that spoke in terms of the plan is going to support in Hanley Industrial Court this conversion from industrial to more of like personal services, business services, and so forth, that somehow we really have to address how those two types of use groups, those main primary use groups, can be able to coexist and be compatible. So that's been addressed on page 54 of the comp plan. It was already mentioned about the renaming and rebranding of Hanley Industrial Court. There's several sections cited in there on pages 54, 57, and 59. And we also had made some changes to the residential plan. The commissioner had helped staff look at what kind of a review of code ordinances related to infill housing, since infill housing and either coming up with some development guidelines or new zoning requirements was extremely important to those that attended most of these meetings. That's been addressed on page 66. We had another commissioner that talked about also including the possibility of a northeast trail connection, and that's been addressed on page 85. Mohit had already addressed about using the rec center parking lot for an event space, so that's been corrected on page 47. And then, again, probably the last thing, which Mohit had covered already, was just the discussions that we've had back and forth about the depth of the mixed-use land use boundary along Brentwood Boulevard. So we can either go into more than that, or I can just address your questions at this time as well.
Did you have some additional revisions that you wanted to recommend that the commission considered tonight, Ms. Kirkmeyer?
For the boundary?
For the plan?
The only thing that I had when I have read this document since last week, we did prepare a resolution for whenever the Planning Commission feels comfortable with moving ahead with the adoption of this plan. And so I did have one amendment that I would like to propose, and that's on page 51. And it is an exhibit that we have on that page that shows development and redevelopment sites along Manchester. And this is very conceptual. If you can turn to page 51 and look at that exhibit. Granted, this is very conceptual, but I do want to also include in that exhibit the proposed location for the tunnel at Dorothy and Mary Avenue, because I wouldn't want to give the impression incorrectly that someone would look at that exhibit and think that we are going to redevelop that property right next to Mary and Dorothy Avenue, because that is not the plan. So that would be the only amendment that I would recommend for the plan.
And I think that's a good amendment. Mr. Mohit, do you agree that
Okay.
doesn't detract from the substance at all of this plan?
Right, I think that shouldn't affect anything, because this is just a vision to show what could happen in this area. But so I believe that the tunnel that's proposed, it's actually at the intersection of Mary and Manchester, near that, right? That was a plan that I remember seeing.
Well, I would recommend we keep the exhibit. I just want to see
Some more
this,
detail.
right, and the label on that.
Okay.
So that's all.
Okay.
Do you have any objection to those clarifications, Mr. Mohit?
No, I think we are okay with this.
Okay. Well, I think your company has done a fantastic job with this plan. It's gotten better and better the more this commission and the committee has looked at it. And
Appreciate
you all
that.
should be commended for putting the amount of time that you have put into this plan. I think this will serve the city well for the next, hopefully not 20 years, hopefully less than 10 or less years moving forward. But is there any final discussion on this issue before we take up this resolution? Ms. Bilderbeck?
I just want to say, way to go, City of Brentwood, because, I mean, seriously, Ms. Korkemeyer, you did a great job working on a difficult process. I think our consultants were very open to hearing from the residents and from the CPAC members, which I had the privilege to sit on, as well as all of the commission members being able to go to those. Having been through the last Planning and Zoning Commission process and comp plan process, when we adopted the last comprehensive plan, this is night and day. I mean, we totally have gotten into, I don't even know what century we're in right now, right? I mean, but just knocks the socks off of everything that we had done before. Just a stellar job. I'm just really excited about it, and I'm proud of it, and I just wanted to give you guys all kudos, because it's a ton of work, and the amount of public engagement that was done with this in such an organized way, and to involve everybody in the community and to give everybody that opportunity is just to be commended. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
Thank you.
Any further commissioner comments? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission on the comp plan? Yes, Ms. Smith?
Karen Smith on the Harrison Hotel Street. So I just had a question. And my key concern at this point is the Brentwood Quarter. And I wasn't sure, based upon the comment just made, whether it is widened versus not changing from the 2006 plan. And if it has been, what exactly are the changes? And I'm most focused, I guess, at this point between Litzinger and like Lawn Avenue. I know we talked about, pulling back on some of the recommendations that were in the plan based on feedback. And I'd like to propose that we even remove any residential areas from the land use map that is calling for the mixed-use development, even from what was originally included in the plan in 2006. Based on what's the redevelopment that's happening within the residential area, even though in my area, even those residential areas that are backing right up to the commercial area. So we have new homes on White, we have a new home on Moritz, there's new a renovated home that added a second story on in Patton. So if you look at the properties along Brentwood, especially between Litzinger and Lawn, the ones that I think you probably would consider would need a little boost that maybe don't represent our city to the way that we would maybe like it to be, are largely owned by one person. And so I feel like if maybe the city could consider working with an architect that has some creative and innovative ways of working with, properties that have challenges, so that we can look at some options besides putting boxes on asphalt. I think, maybe that could go a long way to help improving our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kirkmeyer, could you please address this concern about and the extent to which the land use plan on the Brentwood Boulevard corridor differs from how it was presented in the 2006 comprehensive plan?
Right. I think the struggle has been in terms of how the exhibits prepared for the 2006 plan versus the new plan. So, and that was one of the things that House and Levine had called out when they just reviewed the 2006 study was that they felt that the plan was good, but the 2006 plan really didn't go into a lot of depth. And so they were actually the consultant that came up with the idea for having the 3 sub-area plans. So one of the sub-area plans, which you would look at more on a micro level, if you would, and look at more details. The Brentwood Corridor sub-area plan was one of them that was recommended, along with the Manchester Road and the Hanley Industrial Court. So the one that's generated the most discussion is the plan for Brentwood Boulevard. And so the one thing I guess that I want to point out is, again, the exhibits that have been used in the 2 plans, they are very similar. And we did have extra copies out here on the table tonight, but we have in front of us the future land use plan map for both the 2006 plan and then what was included in the new plan. And there really is not much departure of anything in terms of including more residential on Brentwood Boulevard. So for example, to kind of give us some benchmarks, because it's hard to read on this exhibit, we're not down to like individual building footprints or parcel lines aren't represented here. Because of the scale of the map, it's just really kind of a swath, if you will. So if you look at the 2 and compare them, it's really equal in my estimation. So for example, some benchmarks to follow. The homes, for instance, on Patton Avenue. If you live on the east side of Patton Avenue, you were in the mixed-use boundary back in 2006, and you would remain in the mixed-use boundary for 2018. Homes that are along Kentland, the same thing. It shows in 2006 that the homes on the west side of Kentland were already in that mixed-use boundary, and they would continue to be. So really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is a collection of some assemblage, would be a more appropriate word, that West Community Credit Union had completed for their new credit union project. So a few more of those parcels now that they've already acquired, and they have been rezoned, have also come into this boundary now, as well as, and I don't see again much difference. It looks like for the properties that are on the east side of Brentwood Boulevard, if you use the alleyways kind of as a benchmark, then the houses that would be in the mixed-use boundary are like 2 houses over from that alleyway. And that's, again, what's represented on the scale of this map. So the only ones, again, that we've picked up are really the ones that were right along by West Community Credit Union. So, but it became more apparent, I guess, just then to summarize. So it became more apparent, I think people were more interested in it this time, because since we did a sub-area plan, Housel and Levine gave us maps that included the footprints of the buildings. And so all of a sudden, people could identify, like, my house now is in that boundary. So I feel that that's probably the best way to summarize this.
I agree.
But I know it's caused, some concern for people, but I believe we're really marching forward with about the same plan that we had in 2006.
As concerns the Brentwood Boulevard corridor.
Brentwood Boulevard,
I agree.
correct.
Yeah, that's well stated, Ms. Kirkmeyer. Ms. Boulderback?
Directly on that point, and we said this at one of the meetings, I can't remember if it was a subcommittee or when it was, but when I used to live on Patton, and when I bought my house in 1992, it already was on the future land use map as commercial, future commercial, when I lived on Patton. So that was 1992, and we're in 2018. So I think one of the things that's important and that we came up with is, you know, of course, some people don't realize that when they buy their house. I was aware of it when I bought mine. There was a gentleman who spoke, who didn't know that when he bought his and was concerned, you know, we were gonna come take his house. And the idea is, again, though understanding that the future land use maps are important, and this is all worth really debating about, and why I passionately took on that issue as well earlier, a couple of months ago, we're not rezoning any property. You don't have to sell it. You're never going to be, well, I would say never. I mean, as far as I know, you're never going to be forced to sell your house. And the way that happens is if somebody comes to you and gives you enough money that you decide that you want to sell your house to someone. So I don't want that to scare people. And we clarified that, and people left and felt a lot better about it. So that was just an important thing. It's been that way for a long time with some of these properties, way longer than 2006, and nothing's happened to it. So, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other commissioners on this? Any members of the audience? Yes, sir. Please step forward and state your name and your address.
My name is Mike Conley. I'm a 58-year resident of Brentwood. Started out on Madge Avenue, and my wife and I have lived on Bridgeport now for about 43 years. About 30 years ago, the administration at that time presented another package to rezone the whole corridor up and down Brentwood Boulevard, planned development. So I got on the site today, downloaded some information. I guess my first question is, I hear that the boundaries have widened since the original report. Is this report that I downloaded off of your report on the website, is that to scale? Can I count my house on here and see that I'm out of that zone?
So, first of all, maybe where there was an earlier draft for the 2018 plan that showed a more narrow corridor than this.
Okay.
And then we compared it, and that's really not where we needed to go. And we explained that to the consultant, and the consultant, you know, agreed too that we need to go ahead and expand that. So if you saw like an earlier version, like the November draft, you probably did see a narrower corridor along
This is from
Brentwood
today.
Boulevard. That would be
I got
it.
this off your website
Right.
today, so is this
That-
current? Is this to scale? It says a draft, that's why I'm asking. And I
Right.
heard this gentleman say that you're going to widen it, and I read 350 feet. Is that from the center of the right-of-way? Is it from the curb? I'm trying to figure out where my house is in this plan here for two reasons. One reason, if it becomes public that this is gonna be passed, then, you know, I don't know how this works as far as zoning plan development, but it kind of puts everybody in that location kind of in limbo, because if I'm gonna buy a house as a new, you know, resident of Brentwood, I don't wanna buy a house that's gonna be PD, because you don't know what's gonna happen to it. So I guess my question is this document downloaded from your site and printed, is that to scale to what the current program is? Sure.
So the map that you have right now in front
Right.
of you, that's not the map that you should be looking at to find the property. This is just telling you conceptual location.
Okay,
So
but I'm
there is
looking
a-
at a scale, see the houses, all the, yeah. So how do I know where my house
So there is
lands on
so
that?
there's a land use map, which is more parcel by parcel.
Okay.
That's the map I think you should, like, this is the map.
But I can't
and-
find my house on that.
Yeah, so this is, I think you have probably the older version, so the current version looks like this.
This is all from your website today. So I guess my point here is, if we're gonna have a vote on a commission that's going to, and don't get me wrong, I think this commission is great, but I think we ought to have accurate information so we know where the residences lie in this plan you have, so that we know, well, one thing, we gonna, you know, am I gonna approve my house? Am I gonna put a $20,000 bathroom in it? Or should I sit and wait to see what happens to my neighbor's house? I don't think it's gonna affect me, but it could be a house and a half from me that, as we all know, depending on what the development is, could be a parking lot. We don't know what's gonna go in there. There's no real plan for that, unless somebody has an insight that you're not sharing with us, that I'm not sure of.
So there's no rezoning. You realize there's no rezoning taking place at all with this
Okay.
plan.
Eventually, will there be though? Eventually, if this is passed, I guess there would have to be.
No, there would not have to be.
No? Okay.
Not at all. This just contemplates a general land use concept that the city is comfortable with at this point. I can't imagine there's any changes there,
No,
but.
actually, you know what, I'll take it back. I was looking at the overall land use plan, but this map is from residential land use. So this is in
This
fact
is
the
it.
most current one.
This is or
the
this
most-
is?
No, this map is the most current.
Okay, but there's no scale on where my
Yeah.
house is. So is this, I guess I'm trying to figure out where my neighbor and myself will lie in this plan. Is there something published that I can go find this out, or?
Yeah, I mean, we can provide the detail, like a bigger map that.
Are street addresses that are in this proposed plan. I mean, I think personally that the residents that are directly affected by this should have knowledge of what's going on, you know, where their homes lie.
Sure. Ms. Kirkmeyer, do you have any insight on
Sure.
this gentleman's?
So I'll help you individually find your home, that's not a
Okay,
problem, we'll take
okay.
care of that. What I would recommend is that on page 42 of the most
have
current
that.
document.
I have that. That's what I have
Okay.
printed, okay.
That what we need to do is ask our consultant to go ahead and lighten this up so you can see the footprint of the buildings underneath these layers.
That would be great.
And that will be the best, way to find out exactly where your house is.
Then myself and all my neighbors, we can count down and see where our houses lie and see if we want to,
Sure.
if you want to put any money into our house or wait to see what happens with the development.
And, again, we use 350 as a benchmark. We're not going to come through, though, and draw such a straight line that we put that line right through the middle of your house.
Right.
So there is, a little bit, but certainly I can help you individually, and we will
Okay.
get this map cleaned up and published, and I think that will go a long way.
appreciate
with
that.
people being
Thank
able
you.
to ascertain that for their own preferences.
And I appreciate the fact that you assured us there won't be any planned development rezoning
No,
because
there's no
that
rezone,
just
no,
kills
no.
property.
Yeah, no, this
Okay.
is not a zoning document at all.
Great, thank you.
I have a question.
Let me first, see, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lynn Crawford. My husband and I live on Garden Court, right behind the mobile. So if I look at this map on several different pages online, some of them look like it goes right in the middle of my house, like you said. So I'm still confused. I would just like some clarification as to whether or not Brentwood Boulevard is gonna move me out of Brentwood.
It sounds like a legitimate concern to me, and it's something that we've asked for throughout this process. I think that the commission is under the understanding that there's not essentially any change in the Brentwood Boulevard corridor. But Ms. Kirkmeyer, do you have some insight on this issue?
So, not other than what I had mentioned before, we're picking up some houses right along where the West Community Credit Union project is planned for. Again, I guess I would just say, bear with us, because I think once, Mohit can go back and republish this map, because in the November one, it was light, it was shaded, and you could see through it. But this latest one,
Is
you
that this
cannot,
one?
so.
This is a different map. This is
Yeah.
just to tell the location.
And we can get that map
There's one with
published.
dotted lines, there's one with dark lines, I mean, it's just kind of humorous.
wall.
But again, there's no rezoning being contemplated in this document, and this commission, frankly, is under the impression that, with the exception of West Community, on the west side of Brentwood Boulevard, there's nothing of significance changing as far as land use is concerned on the Brentwood Boulevard corridor.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
But Brentwood Boulevard will be widened?
No. No, not at all.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else like to address the commission? Any further discussion from commissioners? Okay, the commission has a resolution in front of it, and the chair will entertain a motion with respect to that resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little torn. I'm comfortable with, I think the plan's amazing, and I'm comfortable with it. And then we have the residents who can't see where their houses are, and I know we've been working on this for a really long time, and it's a really, really good plan, but it seems to me like before we vote on it, that we should have a map that looks like that one on the wall where the people can see where their parcels are. I want to recommend approval, but that's my only concern. And I don't mean approval, I mean adoption, because the Planning and Zoning Commission adopts, so thus, our action tonight is the last action on this, and it goes into effect. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Sure. No, I respect these concerns, and I think we've spent a great deal of time on Brentwood Boulevard and whether there's going to be any changes. And frankly, we're relying on the consultant, and Ms. Kirkemeyer and I think we're all operating under the understanding that the land use concept for Brentwood Boulevard is not changing from the 2006 plan, except for on the west side of Brentwood, in the west community area. Is that correct? Which the commission took up a project application on the west community, the new bank over there.
So with that understanding, I recommend that we adopt the plan.
Wait, is that true?
That is true,
Second.
so.
Okay, so hopefully we're putting, these are legitimate concerns, so we want to put you all at ease on that issue.
Can I ask who did the second? We couldn't.
Mr. Nelson. Okay,
Thank
motion by Ms. Bilderback, a second by Mr. Nelson to adopt the resolution approving the comprehensive plan. Any further discussion? All right, roll call.
Sherry Bilderback, yes. Mark Favazza,
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen,
Yes.
Michael Hart,
Yes.
Rebecca Jacobs,
Yes.
Jeff Moore,
Yes.
Paul Moran,
Yeah.
Hart Nelson,
Yes.
John Ritter,
Yes.
Lisa Schering,
Yes.
Tom Shipley.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr.
Motion
Chairman.
passes unanimously. Well done, Commissioners.
How long was it?
3 years. Hey, Mr. Mohit, thank you. Your company did a fantastic job. This is a document we can all be proud of. It's going to serve our city well moving forward.
And we're gonna get those maps. Right, maps that people can see through like that, so they can see and they can compare it to the 2006 plan.
Yes, but that's the one thing they can't compare it to the 2006 because, again, it wasn't done at.
It's on the wall. That's the
Not
2006
with the
plan.
footprints, but that's.
All right, Ms. Kirkemeyer, I want to thank you as well for shepherding this commission and the committee through this process. You've
You're
done a
welcome.
fantastic
It's been
job
fun.
as well, so thank you very much. Thank you to all of you.
Seriously, that's fun.
All right, is there any new business before the commission this evening? Is there any aldermen present? Mr. Lockmuller, any report? City planner, Ms. Kirkemeyer?
Just disclosure reports, do me first, please.
Yeah, make sure you get those in. We don't want to go crossways.
Still missing a few. And if you can't remember, you can go into the city's website and check.
Okay, no need for a subcommittee rationale. Ms. Kirkemeyer, you can pass that along. Any other business this evening? Ms. Hanson, we're going to miss you.
Good. Thank you.
Sorry I couldn't persuade you to reconsider. Any other business? Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is
So moved.
there a second? Second. All in favor?
You were the second.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Stand adjourned.